They say the college football is starting to get into NFL football for like the last 10 years, because RPOs, play actions have become RPOs. And I think what Bo Nix did with Denver, there's a lot of Oregon shit in there. Is it very similar from your experience here over the last couple of weeks, breaking down Washington and everything going on to the NFL style of play? Or are there two very separate things that you could point out?
Yeah, I still think there's a pretty big gap. I think, most college teams have a few pro players, but the other guys are either a long way off or that's not really the talent isn't at that level, especially the quarterback position. NFL quarterbacks and college quarterbacks, for the most part, I think there's a pretty big gap there. So what you're defending in the passing game is just different. The NFL guys can hit almost everything, every throw. I would say that's not really true of all the college quarterbacks. You have a lot more college quarterback run game, call it Wildcat, some version of that, in addition to the passing game. So the hash marks, obviously are different. And I just think there's a bigger gap between, let's call it seniors and freshmen than there is between, some of the first-year players. You have a couple rookies on your team, but not usually too many. And the veteran players. I think just the overall, talent gap on each team is a little bit smaller in the NFL than is in college football. It's not a bad thing. It's just a little bit different.
Okay, so let's talk about that talent gap and how some guys are able to make the transition. Obviously, last season, C.J. Stroud had the best rookie quarterback season of all time. We're getting a chance to see some of these rookies now, more specifically first-round quarterbacks, in some action. Caleb Williams, the highlights that we saw and the way he handled himself and his composure and the stories that we're hearing from off the field about how he's the one actually telling the team, hey, we need to pick up our shit around the locker room, as opposed to a veteran saying that. Seemingly meeting all the criteria to be an NFL quarterback. What are your thoughts on it? Have you got a chance to see it? And how quickly can we judge somebody, you think, from your experience?
Well, I think we're going to have to judge the rookies when they get to the regular season. Preseason is a good time to gain experience and, get a little bit of game exposure, but especially at the quarterback position, the defenses are very basic. There's not a lot of scheme, and when you're on the defensive side of the ball, you're playing, let's call it three deep throughout the course of the game, first quarter, to midway through the third quarter to another group to finish the game. You're running the same things the whole game. You're not game planning. You're not showing too much. You're just trying to run the stuff you've been practicing. So, what the quarterbacks see in preseason and what they see in joint practices, and then what they see during the regular season, I think are going to be quite different. It's almost like playing in an all-star game where you just see a handful of coverages.
Okay, so what can you pick up, whenever you were evaluating your team in these preseason games against very basic looks, what are you judging them on for guys that are maybe bottom half of the roster or even the starters who could potentially get, what should we be watching these games and taking seriously, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, I think what the coaches are evaluating is how well the players do the things that they've been instructed to do and they've practiced to do. So their fundamentals, the communication within the limited, watered-down schemes that they're running, and just the live competition that you don't get to see in practice. There's not much live tackling. There's not much live running for the running backs and the receivers after the catch, the live tackling, and even the defeating blocks and blocking in the interior line. Then there's still that finishing the block, getting off the block, making the tackle, not being able to, or offensively, finishing blocks, cleaning the pocket, knocking guys down that you generally refrain from when you're working with your own team. You don't want to get your own players injured on that. But, once you're in a competitive situation, I think you can evaluate the player's toughness, competitiveness, and his ability to finish plays better than what you can in practice. So those are all fundamental things. I think that the scheme part of it, again, is very, very watered down.
Go ahead, AJ.
Coach, how did you, throughout your time when you're coaching in New England, how would you put together a plan of how your starters may or may not play throughout the preseason? And did that change throughout your time in the NFL, how you kind of employed your starters?
Yeah, that's a great question, AJ, and that's one that I think it's a pretty long conversation, but a very, very important one. It really just depends on your team. If you're going to put your starting quarterback out there, you probably want to put him out there with your starting offensive line. You want to put him out there with, receivers that he's going to be throwing to. So if if your depth is not good at those positions at that particular point in time, maybe you got a couple of guys banged up or whatever, then is it really worth it? And on top of that, you have to spend time preparing for your opponent, right? You don't know what they're going to do. So I don't think you want to play, your starters for 5 plays. That doesn't really do any good. You want to maybe leave them out there for, 20, 25 plays, something like that. Well, that involves preparation time, and that's maybe 2 or 3 days of practice. And I'd say with the shortened, training camp time frame now, that's a little harder to do than what it was in the past. I remember when I was, with the Giants and you had 3.5 weeks of training camp, you could take 3 days to prepare for your first preseason game and play your guys, 20 plays a game or so, and, let them get into it. Well, now it's hard to get those days. When you go with joint practices, you can go ahead and put your best players out there and let them compete against the other team, for a couple days and really get a lot of reps and get a lot of quality work. Then, do you really want to come back and play those guys 2 days later, basically on no rest and put them in a big contact situation? Can you get more out of the joint practices? So, and then some of it, especially at the quarterback position, I think depends a little bit on the player. Like Tom always wanted to play in preseason. He always felt like, I want to get more work. I want to get the live, the speed of the game. I want to do that. And so, and then, I've been with other players that are kind of, not that they don't, they really don't want to do that as much. Like, I want to get a lot of work in practice. I really want to do that. The 10 plays in the preseason game doesn't really do anything for me. I don't care about that. And I don't think there's a right or wrong on that, but I do think that especially with the quarterback position, you would take that into consideration. If the player really wanted to play and felt like he needed it for his timing, then I think you'd probably find a way to do it. But as far as the rookies go, I think for those guys, they should play and they should get a feel for the game, the speed of the pass rush, just, especially I'd say some of the rookie quarterbacks this year who, some of whom are a little undersized, just, the height and the girth of the defensive linemen and all that. I mean, that's good for him to experience in a live game situation, not just practice. But from the team standpoint, you just want to make sure that you can, protect those guys both with their linemen and also with receivers and backs and so forth that know what they're doing out there, so that if there's any type of adjustments that need to be made, you have guys out there that are going to, do the right thing and give the quarterback an opportunity to get rid of the ball.
That was one of the best situations or situational answers I've ever heard in my entire life. And speaking of situations, joint practices, you just mentioned it there briefly. D-Butch got a question for you about.
Yeah, Coach, there's been obviously more of an emphasis on that with teams going at it with other teams in joint practices. What was your approach as far as you mentioned it with the quarterbacks and different situational, third down, red area, and then also with the fights? Obviously, there's been some more fights going on big time with Detroit and the Giants, so much so that they got some fines. So what was like you're talking to with the team going into these practices with other organizations?
Well, the way I think, look, it's really important that whoever you're having a joint practice with, you're on the same page with the other staff and the other team. And say for the most part, I've had really very little problem with that. You get on the same page with the other coach, and what happens in the game if you get in a fight, you get ejected, right? So in practice, when we have fights, then we just eject those players, and so. We're out there to practice. We're out there to get better. The people that we're working with are there for the same reason. So, you have to try to get a little bit of the macho part out of it and just, focus on improving as an individual and improving as a team. Sometimes when something happens and there's a, called borderline play, is it a cheap shot? Is it a late hit? Is that kind of thing? Those are the kind of things that set it off. And hopefully, in most of my career, cooler heads have prevailed. Certainly working with coaches like with Sean Payton, or, we had, great practices with the Eagles and last year with Green Bay with Coach LaFleur and with Houston and so forth. That some of the ones we've had in the past, they're really, you just have to get on the same practice tempo with your opponent. And so, the fights and all, if that's what it is, then you're probably better off not practicing with that team. It's just, it's counterproductive. But the great thing about the joint practices is, just as D-Butt said, you run all your stuff defensively. You run your blitzes, you run your combination coverages, you run your disguises, you run all those things that you're not going to run in a preseason game. And you get to see them against another, live competition and vice versa. They run their their motions, their pick plays, their gadget plays, things like that, just to get a look at them against, they've run against themselves, but now they get to run them against you. And so you can really work with each other. And I think your team can take some major steps forward, even though it doesn't show up on the field until you get to the real games. But in terms of preparing your team, I thought they were great. And we can go out there and rep your starters, if you will, 40 plays, 45 plays, and really give them a hard, practice, both mentally and from a conditioning standpoint, that you probably aren't going to do in a preseason game. And you do it back to back, and in 2 days you cover a lot of situations. So I thought they're very good in the environment that we have now relative to the length of training camp and the 3 preseason games.
Starters are going to love it, obviously. Oh, I got to go 110%. Okay, great. For how many reps? 40 of them. And then we're going to reset it too, by the way, and we're going to do it again. We got goal line, we got red zone, and third down today. So third down, we got 2 and
Good first
2
good,
minutes.
But Pat, if you're like AJ's, AJ's a good player. He's a great player. He wants to play well. How's he going to play well? Prepare. How are you going to prepare? You go against another team. Right?
I agree completely. But this is
going on. You don't know who that guy is. So, good players want to compete. Good players want to get better. Good players want to, they want to do things that'll make them play better in the regular season games. They don't want to go out and, get clipped by some free agent that's going to be driving a truck next week. They want to work against other players who, respect the competitiveness of the joint practices.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
And so I think those players, they embrace it. I mean, they enjoy it. And then there's a game within a game. Hey, can we fool them? Can we disguise them? Can we use a coverage or run a play or a blocking scheme or something? It's a little bit different. How will that work against these guys? Your team's seen it, 8 times. It doesn't work anymore against them, but can we get that against somebody else? So the players that I've coached have really embraced the joint practices. It's a lot of work, but you've got to do something to get better. You just can't sit around and, kumbaya and it all come together. At some point, you got to go out there and play football.
Okay, so what I wanted to say there.
Defend me on this one, AJ.
Hey, amen. No,
spot on, Coach. Spot on.
100% right. But as this has become, it feels like you were ahead of the game with the joint practices. Feels like you were. You were doing them, and then now it's like very commonplace that D brought up. I think like your players and the way you run things is obviously what everybody's going to do. But what is the history of joint practices? Have they always been around? Because like now it feels like there's a shit ton of them like happening every single week when it wasn't really always like that. Were they doing this way back? Do you know?
Well, at the Giants, we did them. We came up against New England and practiced against New England. So I was back in the 80s. But again, I think it's also good to see how other teams practice. And sometimes we do this drill a certain way. We do it their way. And you're like, you know what? Like, that's not bad. Maybe we should start doing it that way. Or they have a certain, whether it's a warm-up or an individual drill or the way they organize a 7-on-7 or a 9-on-7 drill or something like that. Or maybe the way they do their red area. A lot of times you get some good ideas out of that. So, it's been around for a while. It really has. We went down in 86. I remember we went down and practiced against the Falcons. You won the Super Bowl. And, I remember walking off the field with Dan Henning. Dan was the head coach down there at that time. And I said, we were kind of talking about each other's team. And Dan, of course, had been at Washington. And, Dan's comment was, hey, Bill, there's nobody in the league that can block your front 7. Don't worry about the running game. You got to be ready for misdirection plays and the passing game. They can't run on that defense. And you know what? When you really step back and think about it, it was Taylor, Banks, Carson, Pepper, Burt, Martin, McGriff. He's right. And sometimes you kind of lose a little bit of perspective of like where your issues are or aren't. Because I wouldn't worry about the running game. You guys spend too much time on the running game. You better be able to defend the pass. Nobody's going to come in here, and try to run the ball 40 times against this front 7. It's ridiculous. And so, and Dan was great. It was a great experience working with the Falcons down there and before the 86 season. But it really helped me see what our team was from the other side of the ball, not from our side. So, things like that. Yeah, it was great.
I love it. I love to hear that. That is awesome. just seeing your team through somebody else's eyes is probably like, oh, because I'm around this gold jacket front seven we have all the time. I forget that other teams are like not sleeping for the entire week thinking about that whenever they only get to play us once a week as opposed to us having to play our guys. It's a beautiful thing. I hope the fights slow down. I do hope the fights slow down because it does sound like it is incredibly beneficial for all parties if they end up working out. Colt's got a couple back-to-back here.
Well, Pat, I always told the officials if there was a fight or a taunt, do what you would do in the game. Treat a taunt like a fight. If our guy catches the ball and goes over and spikes the ball in front of their bench, just throw him out of there because it's just going to cause a deterioration of practice, and it's not what we're here for. We're here to improve, and, hey, we're going to make some plays. They're going to make some plays. But it's not about, like, making fun of each other and taunting and, and trying to cheap shot somebody. It's about, make a play. We'll go back and make another one. Just keep making them. Keep showing us what you can do to help contribute to the team, earn your spot. I mean, this is your chance for it. So I think if the officials who are officiating the training camp practices would take a little more of that mentality of like, look, we're not going to put up with that stuff. And I told the officials too, that look, if our guys come in a huddle and they don't have their knee pads down and they don't have the proper equipment on or, whatever it was, then just throw them out. And they did. And that really, then I'm saying, well, look, the reason you're not in there is because you don't have any knee pads on. So go get them on. The official threw you out, not me. What do you want me to do? And so things like that, I think the officials can really help get the players used to it. I'd set the 40-second clock at 35 seconds instead of 40. And, because we didn't tackle, but, we got less time. We got to get back in the huddle. We have, less time to operate and speed it up and get into the game. And hopefully it doesn't feel, as rushed. So I always believed in, harder in practice than in the games. But I do think the officials who officiate those joint practices can really help get the players ready for the regular season by, being as strict on them or maybe even a little bit stricter than they are, during the season. I think that they can help on that.
I appreciate you blaming the refs at your practice. I really do.
I'm not blaming the refs.
No. I'm saying whenever you say he kicked you out, it was Whitecap kicked you out. It wasn't me. What do you want me to do? I don't know. I love that. That is an awesome thing because obviously players buy in. Your players have, and it's treated like a game because that's how you're evaluating. It sounds like, especially in the practice situations, this is a game. We need to treat it that way, and we get 2 games back to back with these teams, which we wouldn't normally have.